Hey guys, it's me. I know I rarely make videos anymore and pretty much only just jump on here when it's convenient for me and I need to make something longer than I can put on Instagram. But today I wanted to talk about the choice between art school versus university versus no school at all to be an artist. I've been seeing a lot of videos on the internet, and I know when I was trying to decide if I should go, I was looking for something like this and didn't really find a lot that helped me in the end of everything. Too much stuff in my life right now. So I thought I would jump on here and talk about my own experience going between art school to university back to art school. So for some context, I grew up in Waldorf education. If you guys don't know what that is, it is based off of Rudolf Steiner's education model. I believe he was German or Austrian or something like that. It really focuses on teaching kids life skills, getting them connected with nature, and less so with technology. So pretty much everything I did starting in kindergarten, going all the way up through when I left Waldorf in 8th grade before going on to public school, was pretty substantially just fully immersed in art. We made big books every year of everything that we'd learned, and we drew every picture by hand and wrote in essays by hand into the book that we'd written about the things we'd learned, so we'd have a hard chronicled copy of what we knew. So basically, I've been making art on a pretty serious level for about 17 years now, and I wanted to go to art school for a long time before I actually went. I kind of thought about it in middle school, and then everyone always said, "Oh no, don't go to art school. Don't go to school for art. It's terrible. Like, you're not going to get a job. It's a useless degree." So I was like, "Okay, well, fine." And then in high school, I hated school so much. I was like, "I'm not going to college. I'm not doing it. I'll work retail forever. That's fine." But then in my last year of school, I kind of was like, "Oh, but maybe I do want to go to art school." So I was looking into it. I really only looked at 3 schools. I looked at Mecca, University of Southern Maine, and Plymouth State University. I lived in New Hampshire at the time, which is why I was looking in New England. Now I live in Portland, right by Mecca, because I go there. But I also didn't really have super good access to the internet, and I didn't really want to go very far from home, so I wasn't really looking into mass art or anything. I think in high school I'd only ever heard of Mecca and Montserrat. I'd also looked into music, so that was more of my focus, was music rather than art for a while, and a lot of these schools other than Mecca had that as a major too. So that's kind of a little bit of background on me. So where I'm going to start is no school for an artist. So there are some pros to it. You don't end up with a bunch of debt from going to college, which for a lot of people is a plus. I kind of wish I didn't end up with college debt, but unfortunately I picked a school that kind of made me end up with a bunch, so that's fine. Also, as a quick note, I forgot to mention, I am just about to go into my junior year, so I've only done 2 years of college, but I will probably make another video like this when I graduate in 2 years. So back to what I was saying, you don't end up with a bunch of debt from going to school, which is always good, so you don't have to worry about paying off student loans. I think when I graduate, I've estimated I'm going to have about 40 grand in student loans, which all things considered is not bad, because I know kids that went to Mecca and graduated with 120 grand in student loans. If you go to like a public university, it's likely you will end up with considerably less. I just chose a private art school, and I'll get into more of that later in the video. But another pro is that you don't have to make a massive time commitment to it. So a lot of schools, to qualify for financial aid, you have to be enrolled full-time. For most schools, that's a minimum of 4 classes. Most classes require about 3 to 6 hours in the classroom per week, plus another 3 hours per credit of homework. Most classes are 3 credits, so another 9 hours. So they expect you to spend, 12 to 15 hours per week working on classwork, including classroom time, which is a lot. And if you're doing 5 classes, that's, realistically speaking, more than a full-time job. I will tell you, I haven't really ended up spending, 60 hours, 45 to 60 hours a week on schoolwork. Thank God. But I know people that have. It depends on your major and how quickly you work. I've always worked really fast, which is a blessing and a curse. Some mediums require you to work slower. Oil paint, I'm sure if I was a painting major, it would slow me way down from where I am now. But another pro is that you don't have to relocate. So I've done a lot of research into art school recently. I've been looking into grad school because I want to make sure that I have all the correct classes in order if I decide to go. So I've noticed there's a lot of them on the East Coast where I am, and there's a lot of them on the West Coast, and a lot of nothing in the middle. Like in the middle, you've got SCAD, there's one in Minneapolis, there's one in Maryland, but that's also the East Coast. So there's not a lot there. So if you don't live on the East or the West Coast and you want to go to art school, realistically you have to relocate at least temporarily, even if just for the school year. So not going to school means you don't necessarily have to do that. Another pro is that we do live in a digital age, in the age of the internet. So there's plenty of information available on YouTube. Skillshare is a great platform. I'm sure if you've watched any art video ever, you've probably seen at least 1,000 ads for it, because I know I have. I used it briefly. It was great. I wish I had the money to sign up again, but being a broke student, I don't. And another pro is that, especially now, there's a lot of really good books coming out. I have a bunch that I like. I don't have them with me, but there is a publisher called 3D Total Publishing. They sell on Amazon. I'm not sponsored or anything. I love their books. They have one on the fundamentals of character design that's phenomenal, and they have one that just came out that is, I think it's How to Be a Children's Book Illustrator, and it's thick, and it is full of information. It's got all kinds of basics on how to do it, how to design characters, just a little bit in there. And then they have all kinds of story examples for different ages and everything. It's so great. So those are really good books to look for. I will probably make a video on some of my favorite art books at some point. But those are some of the pros of not going to school. Basically, less money, less time commitment, don't have to move, and plenty of information out there on the internet. Now, some of the cons. Speaking of information out there, you can learn bad habits from things on the internet that maybe the people don't necessarily know exactly what they're doing. So there are some mediums in art that are really technical, like oil painting has a lot of really specific rules. Like, things can burst into flames if you're not careful. So you want to make sure you're learning how to do that properly. There's a lot of mediums that require proper ventilation. So you can learn a lot of bad things that way. You can also learn bad posture. You can learn bad techniques. You can learn bad anything on the internet for any subject, but it's especially important with technical things like art to just be aware of where your content is coming from and look into, where that person got their knowledge. Probably check a couple different sources just to verify that it's correct, just so you don't injure yourself or other people. Another, I wouldn't say con, but just a note that I have to throw in here. A lot of people do say you have to learn the rules before you can break them. And a lot of people say that's a total lie. And I personally have to agree that you should learn the rules. I don't think it's a requirement, but I will definitely tell you that once I sat down and took an introduction to drawing class and actually learned how to draw perspective properly, how to draw proportion properly, my art just completely transformed. So it's definitely helpful to learn the rules, especially when it comes to anatomy. The way that I look at it, no pun intended, is that if you want to stylize something, it really helps to know how it's supposed to look like before you stylize it. So I just figured I'd throw that little bit in there. It's probably going to make some people angry, but that's just my 2 cents on the learn the rules thing. Another con is that there's no one that can help you troubleshoot. If you're struggling with something, if you can't figure out, oh my god, I feel like this whole arm is in the wrong position, or like my illustration just looks totally weird, or like my paint is not drying, or my paint is drying too fast. Like, being on your own, you really don't have anyone other than Google to help you, unless you happen to, connect with other artists, which again is great and helpful, but you can also get bad advice there. So not having a mentor does make it kind of difficult. I mean, granted, there's like art classes that you can take a lot of, there's a lot of like continuing studies or private art studios, and those are really great. I've taken some classes at a private studio that were awesome when I was younger. So having somebody to help you troubleshoot if you're struggling with something is practically invaluable to me. Another con of not being in art school is that you don't get the experience of having a big group of peers that are also in school with you. So I really enjoyed having friends in school. I spent the last year doing classes online, and while I did have friends, it was still really difficult because it was all online. I wasn't in a classroom. But when I am in a classroom, it's nice to have friends to sit there and work together. It kind of helps motivate you, or at least it does with me anyway. I always love seeing other artists working, and I'm always, amazed by watching what my friends are making because they're so talented, and it's so nice to just be in that kind of environment. But not going to art school, it's harder to get that. There's definitely ways that you can have it if you get a group of friends together, or you can usually find a local sketching group, and then you can all go and work together, which is always good. And then you can also get advice from your friends too. Like if you're struggling with something, and you can ask their opinion on what you think, what they think you should do. It's always nice to be able to do that. But I will also say I grew up in a small town in New Hampshire, and we just, there's no art scene where I'm from, period. Like, there's a handful of kids in high school that are like super into art, and that's it. So it was just not a thing to connect with other artists where I'm from. And the final con that I thought of is that many creative jobs require you to have a degree. Now, if you're freelancing, a lot of the time they'll care more about your portfolio and less about your qualifications. Put that in air quotes, because if you've been making art, for like 15 years, but you don't have a piece of paper that says that you went to school for it, they're probably still going to call you qualified, versus like if you have an associate's degree in something and no other experience, they probably won't pick you over that other person. But recently I ran into an issue where I was trying to get a job doing freelance, and because I'm a student, they didn't want to pay the hourly rate I was asking for because they assumed I'd charge them less because I didn't have my full degree yet. So even though I'm in school and trying to freelance, it still matters that I don't have a piece of paper that says I went through school. I also have a friend who has more than a degree's worth of graphic design experience, and they're having a really difficult time getting hired. And they have specifically been told, if you had a degree, we could give you the job, but you don't, so I'm sorry. So, unfortunately, we do live in a world where that expensive little piece of paper really kind of does matter. Like I said, for freelancing in general, as long as you have the portfolio and the skills to back yourself up, you're probably fine without one. But for a lot of things like graphic design, web design, game design, animation, unless your portfolio is like god tier legendary, you really need to have that piece of paper to get a job. So now that I've spent 15 minutes talking about why you shouldn't go to school, I'm going to talk about why I think you should go to school for art. So, as I was saying, a lot of jobs do require a degree. I'm not going to go all the way back over that. You just heard me ramble about that. Why I chose to go to school for art is for a handful of reasons. I mean, I wanted to go. That's the big one. I also felt pressure from the world and just from, not directly from my peers, but a lot of my peers were getting ready to go to school and preparing to go to college. My best friend was in college. And I just really wanted to, like, feel like I was on the track I should be on and hitting all the milestones I should be hitting at that age. And, you know, I took 4 years off to work, and, you know, I couldn't afford college at the time. When I graduated, I was also 17. My work ethic was absolutely horrendous, and I hated school. I was an anxious ball of nerves. Not that I'm much better now, but going through orientation, even at almost 21, or almost 22, I was almost 22. I keep forgetting how old I am. Even going through orientation at almost 22 years old was still absolutely terrifying. You know, I mean, they stuck me with 140 other kids for a full weekend. You know, just like all day, every day, like 9 to 6. It was insane. And like thinking about that and thinking about my younger self, I would have been so overwhelmed. I would have quit before orientation was done. I would have been calling my parents and begging them to come take me home. And just, even with my work ethic that I gained from capitalistic retail working, freshman year was hard. It was really hard. So, being 17 when I graduated, if I'd gone into college, I wouldn't have made it. I would have failed everything. It would have been bad. So, I'm happy that I waited 4 years to go. I didn't exactly have a plan of, I'm going to wait exactly this long, but I just kind of hit a point where my partner was getting ready to graduate college, and I had been working retail. We were living up in Central Maine together, and I just had one day at work, and I got home. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I can't work retail forever. I'm gonna, like, half the time I wanted to unalive myself because I was so angry because of how, like, horrifying I was treated by customers all the time. And I was just like, I can't do it anymore. I have to do something else. And decided on a whim to apply to art school and finish my portfolio and essay in a span of like 3 days. So that's what drove me to go to art school. It was kind of just that, like, fuck it moment of, I can't do it. So, you know, if you're looking for a reason to go to school, you know, that's mine. Like I said earlier, I looked at Mecca, USM, and Plymouth State University. Mecca because I knew somebody else who wanted to go there, and her art was amazing, and that's how I'd heard about it. So I looked into it, toured the school a few times. It was incredible, and basically my dream school all throughout high school. USM because it was cheaper. It was also in Portland because I love Portland, and my goal in life has always been to live here. And Plymouth State University because it was in my home state. I toured it freshman year, and their dining hall was incredible. It was like an all-you-can-eat buffet. They had self-serve frozen yogurt. I was a kid. It was like the best idea ever. I did my freshman year at Mecca, my sophomore year last year at USM. When I was looking to leave Mecca, I'd applied at both USM and Plymouth State, got into both. Plymouth State just didn't give me enough financial aid and were not willing to work with me, so I ended up at USM, which I think worked out for the better because I would have had to live on campus at Plymouth State, and you can't pay me to go back to New Hampshire. It's not happening. So, yeah, there's that. Why art school and how it's been good for me. Okay, I wrote notes, so I'm trying to remember what my logic was here. And this video is already 20 minutes, so if you're still here, thank you for watching this far. So why I think an art specific school is good, even in just my freshman year, even after just 1 year, my art just exponentially improved. Just from everything I learned, from learning about composition and color and value and how things interact with each other, things like tangents, all of that, like, my art just totally transformed. And even after just 2 years of a degree, and my art is still just so much better now than it was before I started, because of the education I've gotten and because of the amount of dedication that it required me to put into my work. As I mentioned before, being in an environment with other motivated people is so nice. Mecca had that, and it was great. Being able to see other people working all the time was just so great. Like, you could walk down the halls, people can install work anywhere in that building, so there's always art everywhere. You can always see other people working. Everybody is so passionate about what they're doing. Everyone has a massive amount of drive, and it's a really nice environment to be in. You learn from people who are actually working as artists. They actually work in their field. The department head of illustration at Mecca does a lot of freelance work. If you're in the Portland area, she's done signs for the Rosemont Market. She's done a lot of signage and like reusable bag designs for Hannaford. Her work is all over the place. And I mean, one of the other teachers does a lot of comics. He owns a store out here, or helps run a store out here, where he sells his comics. So they're people that are actually working in the industry they're teaching you about, which is just, it's invaluable in itself, because they can tell you about their own experiences of being in the industry and ways that they've had to troubleshoot problems too. The other thing that I liked about specifically art school is that the academics were a lot easier. Not that I really struggled at university, but they were just, I took 2 English classes and 1 art history class there. I was like a terrified freshman, totally unprepared for the intensity of the art history class, but I still managed to pass it with, I think I like an A- or something. All things considered, I didn't do too badly. But a lot of the academics are also geared more towards artists. Like, in the spring, I'm signed up for a class that's on the history of piracy. So that is just super cool. And I'm also taking a natural science class, and I have friends that I think have taken that, and they basically, for presentations, have you make art projects to turn in with your papers, or instead of papers. So they're really, like, they understand how artist brains work, and they cater more toward that. So if you are an artist or an art student and you struggle with traditional academic classes, which I know I did, art school academics are definitely a lot different and a little easier to digest. Why I chose Mecca specifically, aside from the fact that it was the only art school I really knew about up here, because it was the only one up here, they have illustration as a major, which is what I want to do, what I've been working on for the last 2 years, and what I'm trying to get myself into as an industry. I decided that, that I'd probably be able to make better connections there, versus another school, because it's an art school in an art city. I know that they know people. I know that they work with big companies. It's a name that's known, which is nice, and it carries some weight versus just a standard university degree, which, You know, it might be trivial, it might make zero difference, but, you know, in the scheme of things, it's a small perk. Part of why I chose to leave was I was frustrated with what some of the administration was doing at the time. They were talking about making major changes that they hadn't even like notified students about, just kind of dropped it on us. A lot of people were upset, and in a lot of ways they're very adamant, and once they've made a decision, like, they will pretend to entertain other people's opinions and the opinions of the students. They'll, you know, hold a forum to discuss it, or, you know, whatever, and then they'll just continue on with what they'd been saying beforehand anyway. So that was very frustrating for me. It really made me feel like they could kind of care less about the students once they got our money, which I kind of am still of the mindset that that's how it is. Speaking of the money, it's very expensive. Mecca is a little under $40,000 a year. They do give merit-based scholarships. Obviously, there's aid through the FAFSA, but my first year, we ended up paying $12,000 out of pocket out of the 40 that it cost. And that's even before housing, because I lived off campus. So, take that as you will. They also handled the panini, if you know what I'm talking about, the beginning of 2020, very badly. They don't do online classes. I think the only online class that they actually really have is like Intro to Literature. And that one ran fine in the spring, and art history was fine in the spring. But they struggled very much to translate their studio classes to online, and basically their solution for all of the freshmen in their foundation classes was to send us a box of 100 and something straws and like $20 in art supplies and say, we're going to give you some projects just to pass the time and give you grades on them at the end. So I was very unimpressed. Me and a lot of other students were very disgruntled and felt like our money was being wasted, and the school was only willing to give us refunds of any lab fees that hadn't been used. So I got about $30 back out of the $18,000 that semester cost. So that kind of really rubbed me the wrong way. We tried petitioning the school for a tuition refund, but they basically said, if you get a tuition refund, you're forfeiting all of the credits that you've been working for this semester. So I was just really angry and decided to leave, which led me to USM. And the reason why I chose to go to USM was A, because it was close. I mean, it's not as close as Mecca is. I mean, Mecca's a 2-minute walk for me. That's like a 20. But I can also take the bus over to USM. It was a lot cheaper for me to go. I ended up being really lucky because I busted my butt freshman year and got really good grades. So I got a lot of scholarships. I didn't have to take out any more federal loans. I didn't have to pay anything out of pocket. And I actually got refunds back, which was really nice and helped me cover all my school supplies, because I had, I think, like $300 of art supplies for spring semester because of painting. So that was nice. There's also a more of a variety in the classes that you can take in the electives than Mecca. They have things like psychology. They have more sciences. And one of the downsides is they actually require you to take a math, which Mecca does not. So I was not looking forward to that, but now I don't have to deal with it. Another thing on the cost is they get more funding because it's a public school and it's part of the University of Maine system. So in general, they just have more money available. So they have more money to give to students. They have more money to fund programs and all that. I felt a little bit less awkward about my age, because at Mecca, it was really weird being almost 22 in a room full of like just barely 18-year-olds. It was like, a lot of them I made friends with, which was nice, but there was definitely some noticeable age differences there, and I just felt really weird being there. But at USM, there was people of all ages. I mean, there was people that were, 18, 19, and then there were people older than me in my classes by a couple years, people older than me by a lot of years. It was really nice to just have that big mix, and I felt a lot less self-conscious of my age. Another pro is that they actually have advisors. So Mecca doesn't have advisors for students. When you're a freshman, I don't know if they've changed it, but when I was a freshman, you were in a first year lab, which was like a seminar class. It was kind of like your orientation class. When you were put into an orientation group, it was with everybody that was going to be in that class with you. So you would at least have some connections with people from the beginning through your first semester. And then that teacher would kind of become your mentor just for freshman year. And then, like, sophomore year, it would be your second year lab teacher, but I wasn't there for that. So USM actually has advisors that you have based on your major. My advisor there was awesome. So I got a lot more guidance with my degree, which was helpful because I bounced around between minors like it was my job. You know, I was like, oh, I want this as a minor. I want to do a double minor. I don't want any minors. I want this as a minor again. I want to do this other minor. And she was great, and she helped me make out like 6 different versions of a graduation plan just to make sure that I could take all the classes I needed for everything and graduate on time. So it was nice to have that, especially where I didn't have it at Mecca. But the reasons why I left USM, they didn't have anything for illustration, period. There was no classes on illustration. There was no commercial art really whatsoever. I think they had like 1 graphic design class, and that was it. Their concentrations are painting and drawing, which is what I was going to do. I think they had sculpture, they had ceramics, they had photography. They used to have printmaking, and then they ended up getting rid of that. So they just have a studio where they run a handful of classes. But it's just, the options just weren't there. And the type of classes that they had were more in the direction of fine arts and gallery arts than commercial art, which is kind of how I personally distinguish between things like painting and sculpting versus like illustration and graphic design, because like illustration and graphic design are things that are kind of meant to be mass produced, versus a lot of things like painting and sculpture, it's just meant to be the one object, the one piece of art, the one time. Not always. You can take paintings and reproduce them, and C. Wyeth is a great example of that. His work's amazing. And the paintings are just massive. They had his work at the museum here, and I got to go see it. It was great. They were like the size of me, and it was mind-blowing to think how they'd been shrunk down into picture books. But it wasn't the right fit for me personally. So I decided I needed to try to go back to Mecca. Another downside that I think I forgot to mention before about universities is that you're not really likely to find illustration as a major at a public college with an art program. At least not in New England. At least not what I could find. I did my best for a few months to comb the entire internet to try to find a public college with an art program, and if I found any, it was very few, and they were in the middle of nowhere. I think one of them was in Idaho or Iowa or something really far away from me. But for the most part, it's just not a program that public colleges have. So another reason why I left USM is because, and this is something I was warned about before going. So I'd reached out to the director of the art department there, and there was a teacher who teaches at both USM and at Mecca that I contacted, just to kind of get their opinions on whether or not it was going to be a good fit for me. And the general consensus that I was told was that I was going to be one of maybe 5 students that were actually motivated to get their work done, and that actually put effort into their work and actually cared and had drive for it. And some of my classes, there were more than that. Some of my classes, it was really nice. Like, most of the class was really motivated and wanted to do the work. And then some of my other classes, we'd be lucky if people shut up half the time. So I didn't feel pushed in my work by my peers or most of my teachers. That one teacher that teaches at both schools, I was lucky to have a class with him, and his standard of work was higher because he teaches over at Mecca too. So he held us to a higher standard, actually gave us criticism, and pushed us. Most of the teachers did not do that. One of my teachers, I couldn't even get to give anything negative about my work. I had no idea how to improve it. And I knew that there were things wrong with it. And it also kind of gave me the excuse to half-ass a lot of things, which was a blessing and a curse, because I had a lot of work. I had a very reading-heavy course that I ended up dropping because it was just way too much. But, you know, having the ability to kind of slack off a little bit was good during the panini, because who wasn't mentally dying? But yeah, I wasn't feeling pushed or challenged by my teachers or by my peers. I wasn't getting enough feedback. The academics were harder than the ones I dealt with at Mecca, but again, I basically just did freshman classes at Mecca, and I took, maybe 4 or 5 academics at USM, and half of them were just impossible. You know, I mean, one of them I busted my butt in some weeks and didn't care others and got the same grade regardless, and I finished that one was the lowest grade of my semester, spring semester. So they were a lot more difficult. I also have to say this as a con. I feel like if I was paying for the education I got at USM, it would have felt like a waste of my time and money. That's not to say that USM and universities don't have good programs, but as I said before, they're not set up for commercial artists, which is what I want to be. I want to be an illustrator. I want to do illustration. There's a very minimal amount of the skills that you can transfer into being an illustrator. Like, the color theory is good. I might take some of the painting skills that I've learned and make some acrylic illustrations at some point. Who knows? And I took 2 experimental art classes while I was there, and those really helped me, like, kind of loosen up in my work and care a little bit less about trying new and scary things and ruining a piece. So those were valuable experiences, but in general, the skills that I was learning, they don't translate. They're not useful to me. And I mean, it was nice to get some credits out of the way and not have to pay anything for a year, especially during the panini, because I would not have wanted to pay for college during that, just because of how much of a nightmare it was. But if I'd been paying for it, I think it would have just felt like a waste. I think it's a great environment for other people. I do know people that are there for the more gallery, fine art type stuff that love it. And I think if I was going for something like ceramics, I would probably have no problem paying for it. But because my goal is illustration, it just felt like a waste of time if I'd been paying for it. So, that's part of the reason why I chose to go back to Mecca, is because they didn't have illustration at USM and they do at Mecca. Another big reason that I chose to go back was I decided that my education is more important than any kind of beef that I have with the administration, unless they're trying to, like, screw me out of money or something. That's a whole other thing that I didn't have to deal with, thank God. But, you know, I mean, I can put up with not loving everything my school is doing as long as I get a good education and I get my money's worth out of it, and I feel like my time's not being wasted. The teachers are definitely worth it. To me, one of my favorite teachers of all time is at Mecca, and I have, I think, at least 2 classes with him next year, and I'm so ecstatic because I admire his work and him as a person, and he has taught me so many invaluable things, and I can't wait to learn more from him. And, you know, I was able to negotiate more financial aid to go back, so I don't have to pay very much out of pocket. I think it's under $500 this semester, which is nice. I do have loans. That was just kind of a given. I'm also an independent student now because I'm almost 24. So I got more in loans, which also helped. But in general, those are kind of the reasons why I went back. So this is a 40-minute video. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. I'm not really expecting a lot of people to get here unless you just really want to know the answer. And I'm going to be a pain in the butt and kind of say, I'm not going to tell you what to do, because only you are going to know what's going to be right for you. But my advice would be research what schools are near you, find out what you can afford, and pick the best one for your budget. And I know that's probably like a little like really kind of moment, like of course you're going to do that. But I mean, Mecca was a little out of my price range and I still went. But if all you can afford is a public college with an art program, go for it. If you can afford a private art school, absolutely do that if that's what you think you want to do. If you're going for something like painting, you're probably going to get just as great of an education at a public college as you are at a private art school. But if you're going for something really specific like illustration or graphic design, or, you know, I think woodworking is one major that my school has that I haven't really seen anywhere else. If you want something really specific and you're able to afford a school that has that over a public college that doesn't, go to the school that has your major. But I will also recommend something that I'm really kicking myself for not doing, which is do a couple years at a community college before you go to a private art school. I know a lot of people say that, and I know when I was thinking about it, I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do all of the years at school, at art school. I want to do all 4 years at Mecca. And I'm really glad I did my foundations at Mecca, but I'm also really glad I did a year at a free to me college, because it cut down on my debt. It cut down on how much I was paying out of pocket. It gave me time to negotiate more financial aid and get a little older so I could get more aid. And I also took a class at one of the community colleges here this past semester, and it was great. I mean, the teacher was phenomenal. He's an industry professional as well. He had great advice. He was a wonderful teacher, and I learned a lot from that class. So it's definitely worth it to spend some time doing that before you go. It'll save you a lot of money in the long run. I think in Portland, SMCC, I think is like $3,000 a year. USM is about 10, and Mecca is about 40. So if you do 2 years at $3,000 a year, you're probably going to get enough aid to cover that anyway. And then you go to Mecca or whatever for 2 years, and then you're only spending half the money you would have on your degree. And I really wish I'd done that so that maybe I'd have less debt. But I'm going to encourage everybody else to do that instead. So that's basically my personal experiences with private art school, public university, and, you know, where my thoughts lie on going to one of those or not going to school at all. If you liked this video, please give it a like. I can't promise the next time I'll upload. This is the first time in 6 months that I've uploaded. I'm not consistent. But if you would like to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, it'll probably be something art related the next time I post. So if you like to see that, turn on notifications and maybe eventually I'll post something. I also do want to try to figure out how to film overhead videos so that I can do more art supply reviews. I have a whole bunch of things that people have been asking for. So once I can figure out a good way to do that, you'll probably see some of those coming along. So definitely turn on notifications if that's something you want to see. If you have any questions about college or anything or art at all, please drop a comment down below. Shoot me a message on Instagram. It's Kia Pickering Art. I will link it in the description of this video. And that's all I've got for you today. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.